The massive alien throne room stretched endlessly, its crystalline walls pulsing with strange purple light. Hundreds of alien nobles filled the space, their insect-like bodies clicking and chittering as they watched the spectacle unfold. At the center of it all sat Emperor Vorthak, a creature the size of a small building with 6 arms and eyes that glowed like dying stars. Down below on the polished floor stood a single human figure that looked completely out of place. Tyrone Jackson wore his usual work clothes, faded blue coveralls with oil stains and steel-toed boots that had seen better days. His dark skin glistened with sweat under the alien lights, but his expression remained calm and determined. He'd come here representing Earth in the most important trade negotiations in human history. The talks hadn't gone the way anyone expected. The aliens thought they were dealing with primitive creatures who would beg and plead for scraps of technology. Instead, they found themselves facing a man who knew exactly what humanity was worth and wasn't willing to settle for less. "Your terms are acceptable," Emperor Vorthak rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. The translation device made his words understandable, but couldn't hide the irritation beneath them. This human had driven a harder bargain than species with 1,000 years more experience. The alien nobles shifted uncomfortably. They'd expected to humiliate the human delegation, not negotiate with them as equals. The Emperor's pride had taken a beating, and everyone in the room could feel his growing anger. Then Vorthak's expression changed, a cruel smile spreading across his features. His courtiers began to whisper excitedly as they recognized that look. Someone was about to suffer for embarrassing their ruler. "However," the Emperor continued, "as a gesture of our newfound friendship, I have a special gift for you, human." The massive doors at the far end of the chamber groaned open. A squad of alien guards marched in, dragging heavy chains behind them. What they were pulling made Tyrone's breath catch in his throat. Was a dragon. Not the fairy tale kind from old Earth stories, but something far more magnificent and terrible. The creature was easily 60 feet long, with scales that shimmered between gold and silver. Its wings were folded tight against its body, each one large enough to cast shadows over entire city blocks. This was clearly a being built for soaring between stars, not crawling on palace floors. But something was horribly wrong. The dragon stumbled with every step, its massive limbs refusing to work together properly. Its proud head swayed unsteadily, and its eyes held a mixture of rage and deep, crushing shame. Scars crisscrossed its hide where alien technology had been grafted to its body, then removed in ways that left permanent damage. "Meet Zephyr," Emperor Vorthak announced, his voice dripping with false kindness. "One of our star dragons. A creature of immense power and intelligence." The alien court erupted in barely contained laughter. They all knew the truth. Zephyr had once been among the mightiest of his kind, capable of flying between solar systems and breathing fire hot enough to melt starship hulls. But years of failed experiments had left him unable to coordinate his movements. To the aliens he was worthless, a broken tool that served no purpose. Tyrone looked into the dragon's eyes and saw something the aliens had missed. Behind the physical damage and humiliation burned an intelligence as sharp as any human's, maybe sharper. This wasn't just an animal, this was a person trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him. "He's yours to keep," the Emperor continued, his smile widening. "Consider him a symbol of our new alliance." The nobles could barely contain their amusement. They imagined the human struggling to care for such a massive, disabled creature. It would be a constant reminder of humanity's place in the galactic order, recipients of alien charity, not equals in any real sense. Tyrone stepped forward, ignoring the snickers from the crowd. He approached Zephyr slowly, keeping his hands visible. The dragon's head turned toward him, nostrils flaring as he caught the human's scent. For a moment, their eyes met across the vast gulf of species and circumstance. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Tyrone said quietly. "I'll take good care of him." His voice carried no trace of the humiliation the aliens expected. Instead, there was something they didn't recognize, genuine respect and determination. Tyrone wasn't seeing a burden or a broken trophy. He was seeing someone who needed help. The Emperor's smile faltered slightly, but his courtiers were too busy congratulating themselves to notice. They had no idea what they just set in motion. Sometimes the cruelest jokes have consequences no one sees coming. The cargo ship's engines hummed quietly as it drifted through the darkness of space, carrying its unusual passengers back to Earth. In the massive hold, Zephyr lay curled as much as his damaged nervous system would allow, his golden scales catching the dim emergency lighting. Tyrone sat nearby on a metal crate, watching the dragon's labored breathing and thinking about what came next. When they finally landed at the old aircraft facility outside Atlanta, Tyrone knew his life was about to change completely. The hangar had been his workshop for 15 years, filled with half-repaired planes and the smell of motor oil. Now he was going to share it with a 60-foot dragon who could barely walk straight. The first few days were rough. Zephyr refused to eat anything Tyrone offered, instead lying in the corner with his massive head turned away from the world. When the human tried to approach, the dragon would let out low warning growls that made the hangar's metal walls vibrate. His pride was wounded deeper than his body and trust seemed impossible. But Tyrone had patience. He'd grown up helping his grandmother care for his grandfather after the old man's stroke left him struggling with simple movements. He recognized the frustration in Zephyr's eyes, the anger that came from a sharp mind trapped in a body that wouldn't obey. "I get it, big guy," Tyrone said one morning, setting down a bowl of water just close enough for the dragon to reach. "You're mad at the world. Can't say I blame you." Instead of pushing for interaction, Tyrone simply went about his work. He started clearing out space, moving his tools and equipment to make room for something much larger than airplane parts. He welded together platforms at different heights, creating ramps and surfaces that might help a creature with coordination problems move around more easily. Zephyr watched these activities with growing curiosity. The human wasn't trying to control him or study him like the aliens had. Instead, he seemed to be preparing the space for a permanent resident, someone who mattered. The breakthrough came during the second week. Tyrone was working late, installing a pulley system that could help lift heavy objects, when he heard a crash from across the hangar. Zephyr had tried to stand and fallen sideways, knocking over a stack of metal drums. The dragon lay there, breathing heavily, his eyes closed in what looked like exhaustion and shame. Without thinking, Tyrone walked over and sat down next to the massive head. "Hey now, we've all been there. First time I tried to fix an engine, I dropped the whole transmission on my foot. Hurt like crazy, but I didn't quit." Something in his voice must have connected, because Zephyr opened one enormous eye to look at him. For the first time, there wasn't hostility in that gaze, just bone-deep weariness. That night, Tyrone called his friend Deshawn, who worked as a physical therapist at the Veterans Hospital downtown. "I need to understand neurological damage," he said. "How the brain talks to muscles, what happens when those signals get mixed up." "You working on some kind of medical device?" Deshawn asked. "Something like that," Tyrone replied, glancing at the dragon who was pretending not to listen to every word. Books arrived by the dozen. Medical textbooks, engineering manuals, anything that might help him understand how to fix what the aliens had broken. Tyrone read late into the night while Zephyr watched from across the hangar, both of them learning to coexist in the same space. Progress came in tiny steps. First, Zephyr began eating the food Tyrone left out, though only when the human wasn't looking. Then he started using the ramps and platforms, finding that the gentle slopes made movement easier than trying to navigate flat surfaces. The real change happened when Tyrone brought in some of his grandmother's old jazz records. The music seemed to calm something in the dragon's spirit, and for the first time, Zephyr made a sound that wasn't angry or pained. It was almost like humming, a deep rumble that harmonized with the saxophone solos. "You like music, don't you?" Tyrone said, not really expecting an answer. To his surprise, Zephyr nodded once, a deliberate movement that sent a thrill through the human's heart. From that moment they began to communicate. Not with words but with gestures, expressions and shared understanding. Tyrone would show Zephyr his plans for mobility aids, and the dragon would indicate what might work or what needed changing. They were becoming partners in the most unlikely rehabilitation project in history. The aliens who had laughed at their emperor's cruel gift had no idea what they'd set in motion. In a converted airplane hangar in Georgia, a friendship was growing that would soon shake the foundations of their empire. 3 months had passed since Zephyr arrived at the hangar, and while his trust in Tyrone had grown stronger every day, his body remained trapped by the damage the aliens had inflicted. The dragon could move around the workshop now, using the ramps and supports Tyrone had built, but true coordination still escaped him. His wings hung uselessly at his sides, and the dream of flight seemed impossibly distant. Tyrone spent his evenings poring over medical journals and alien technology manuals, searching for answers the doctors back on the homeworld had missed. He'd learned enough about dragon physiology to understand that Zephyr's problem wasn't just physical damage, something was actively interfering with his neural pathways. The discovery came by accident. While cleaning some of the scarred areas on Zephyr's neck, Tyrone noticed something odd beneath the scales. It felt like metal, warm to the touch and pulsing with a faint energy signature. When he mentioned it to his friend Deshawn during one of their evening calls, the physical therapist had a shocking suggestion. "Sounds like there might be something still in there," Deshawn said. Back in my army days we had soldiers come in with shrapnel that doctors missed. Sometimes the body grows tissue around foreign objects, hides them from scans. That night, Tyrone couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about all the scars on Zephyr's body, the places where alien technology had been attached and supposedly removed. What if the removal had been incomplete? What if some of the control devices were still there, still sending conflicting signals to the dragon's nervous system? He shared his theory with Zephyr the next morning, sketching diagrams and pointing to the areas where he suspected hidden implants might be lurking. The dragon's eyes lit up with something Tyrone had never seen before: hope. Getting the equipment they needed wasn't easy. Tyrone cashed in favors from every contact he had in the aerospace industry, borrowing medical scanners and surgical tools that cost more than most people made in a year. Deshawn drove down from Atlanta with a portable X-ray machine that had been scheduled for disposal. The scans confirmed Tyrone's worst fears and greatest hopes. Zephyr's body was riddled with tiny alien devices, most no bigger than computer chips, embedded deep in muscle and nerve tissue. They were still active, still broadcasting interference patterns that scrambled the dragon's natural neural signals. "This is gonna hurt," Tyrone warned, laying out his makeshift surgical tools. "And I'm not gonna lie to you, I've never done anything like this before. But if we don't try, nothing changes." Zephyr nodded solemnly, positioning himself on the reinforced surgical table they'd constructed together. His trust was absolute, even facing the unknown. The first extraction took 4 hours. Working by feel as much as sight, Tyrone carefully isolated one of the larger implants from the surrounding tissue. The device fought him every step of the way, sending painful shocks through both his hands and Zephyr's body. But when it finally came free, the change was immediate. The muscles around the extraction site relaxed for the first time in years. They worked in stages over the following weeks. Each surgery was a battle against alien technology that seemed designed to resist removal. Some devices had grown tendrils into Zephyr's spine. Others had wrapped themselves around major nerve clusters. The most insidious ones had learned to mimic the dragon's own neural patterns, making them nearly impossible to distinguish from healthy tissue. Tyrone's hands cramped from the delicate work. His eyes burned from staring through magnifying lenses for hours at a time. But every successful extraction brought visible improvements. Zephyr's movements became smoother, more controlled. The constant pain that had clouded his eyes began to fade. The breakthrough came during the 7th surgery. Tyrone was working on a cluster of implants near the base of Zephyr's wings when suddenly, involuntarily, the great appendages spread wide. Both human and dragon froze in amazement. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, sunlight streamed through the hangar's open doors and caught the membranes between Zephyr's wing bones, turning them into stained glass windows of gold and silver. "Did you mean to do that?" Tyrone whispered. Zephyr's response was to fold his wings carefully, then spread them again with deliberate control. Tears ran down both their faces as the dragon stood, fully coordinated for the first time in years, and took his first tentative steps toward the hangar's exit. The test flight was supposed to be careful, just a short hop to see if the wings could support his weight. Instead, Zephyr launched himself skyward with a roar of pure joy that echoed across the Georgia countryside. He soared above the clouds, performing loops and spirals that would have been impossible just hours before. Watching from the ground, Tyrone felt something shift in the universe. They'd done more than heal a damaged creature. They'd proven that compassion and determination could overcome the cruelest intentions. News traveled fast in the galaxy, especially bad news for those in power. Within days of Zephyr's first flight, reports were flooding into the Valerian Empire from their spy networks scattered across known space. A human had done the impossible, restored a broken star dragon to full health and flight capability. The information reached Emperor Vorthak while he was holding court, and his reaction was immediate and violent. The crystal goblet in his massive hand shattered, sending purple liquid cascading down his arm. The assembled nobles fell silent as their ruler's eyes blazed with fury that could melt starship hulls. For months, they'd been quietly mocking him about the human who had negotiated too well, the primitive creature who had dared treat their emperor as an equal. Now that same human had turned their joke into a humiliation. "Impossible," Vorthak snarled, his voice echoing through the throne room. "That dragon was broken beyond repair. Our best scientists tried for years. But the evidence kept pouring in. Surveillance footage from Earth satellites showed a magnificent golden dragon soaring through blue skies with perfect control. Intelligence reports confirmed that the human, Tyrone Jackson, had somehow succeeded where the Empire's greatest minds had failed. Worse yet, he'd done it using primitive human medical knowledge combined with stubborn determination. The implications were staggering. If humans could repair what Valerian science couldn't fix, what did that say about the Empire's supposed superiority? Word was already spreading to other subjugated species, whispering about a small blue planet where miracles happened in aircraft hangars. Back on Earth, Tyrone was dealing with his own problems. Zephyr's restored abilities had awakened something ancient and powerful within the dragon. Every night, he would fly to the highest point he could reach and release calls that seemed to echo across impossible distances. They weren't random sounds, they were messages transmitted on frequencies that human equipment could barely detect. "What are you doing up there, big guy?" Tyrone asked one evening as Zephyr prepared for another midnight flight. The dragon turned to look at him, and Tyrone saw something new in those ancient eyes. Purpose. Determination. And underneath it all, a deep sadness that spoke of loss and separation spanning decades. Zephyr couldn't explain in words, but Tyrone began to understand through their shared bond. The star dragons hadn't always been slaves to the Valerian Empire. Once, they had been free creatures who soared between worlds, forming family groups that spanned solar systems. The Empire had captured them one by one, broken their spirits through torture and experimentation, scattered the survivors across the galaxy as trophies and tools. But now one of them was free and whole again, and his voice was carrying across the void to others who had given up hope of ever seeing home. The responses started coming after 2 weeks. First just one, a faint signal from somewhere in the Centauri system. Then another from the direction of the galactic core. Soon, Zephyr was spending entire nights in complex conversations with dragons Tyrone couldn't see, coordinating something that made the human both excited and terrified. Meanwhile, Emperor Vortak was assembling the largest military fleet the Empire had deployed in a generation. 300 warships, enough firepower to crack planets, all focused on one small blue world and the human who had dared to embarrass their ruler. "We will reclaim what belongs to us," the Emperor announced to his assembled fleet commanders. "And we will make an example of this primitive species that will echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years. The fleet launched within days, their massive ships tearing holes through hyperspace as they raced toward Earth. Vortak himself commanded the flagship, a dreadnought the size of a small moon bristling with weapons that could sterilize continents. On Earth, Tyrone watched the news reports with growing dread. Earth's planetary defense force was impressive by human standards, but nothing compared to what was coming. He'd brought destruction down on his entire species by refusing to accept that Zephyr was broken beyond repair. But Zephyr seemed strangely calm as the alien armada approached. The dragon spent his days resting in the hangar, conserving his strength for something Tyrone couldn't yet understand. His nightly flights had stopped, replaced by what looked almost like meditation. Then, 3 days before the Valerian fleet was due to arrive, everything changed. Tyrone woke to find the hangar empty and Zephyr nowhere to be seen. Panicking, he ran outside and looked up at the dawn sky. What he saw there made his heart stop. Dozens of shapes were descending through Earth's atmosphere, wings spread wide as they rode the upper air currents. Dragons. Dozens of them from every corner of the galaxy, converging on a small aircraft hangar in Georgia. Zephyr hadn't been calling for help. He'd been calling his family home. The sky above Georgia had never seen anything like it. 43 dragons from across the known galaxy circled in perfect formation, their scales catching the morning sunlight like living jewels. Each one told a story of survival against impossible odds. Some bore the scars of experimental surgeries, others showed signs of malnutrition from years of captivity, but all shared the same fierce determination burning in their ancient eyes. Tyrone stood in the center of his hangar, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life, yet somehow more important too. These magnificent creatures had traveled unimaginable distances because of what he'd done for one broken dragon. Zephyr landed gracefully beside him, and for the first time since they'd met, the dragon spoke actual words in perfect English. They needed to see that healing was possible, Zephyr said, his voice like distant thunder. For too long, we believed the Empire's lies that we were nothing more than broken tools. The other dragons began landing around the hangar, each one nodding respectfully to Tyrone as they touched down. Among them was Ember, a scarlet female who had escaped from a mining colony in the Vega system. There was Frost, whose white scales had been dulled by years in underground fighting pits. Storm arrived with electrical burns covering half his body from powering an alien city's energy grid. Each dragon had their own story of captivity and suffering, but more importantly, each had found the courage to break free after hearing Zephyr's calls. Word had spread through hidden networks that a human had done what no alien scientist could manage, restore a star dragon's dignity along with his flight. High above Earth's atmosphere, Emperor Vortak's massive fleet dropped out of hyperspace right on schedule. 300 of the Empire's finest warships arranged themselves in attack formation, their weapons powered and targeting systems locked onto the small blue planet below. The Emperor stood on his flagship's bridge, savoring the moment of anticipated victory. "Begin the bombardment," he commanded. "I want that dragon and his human protector brought to me alive, but everything else can burn." The first wave of attack ships screamed toward Earth's atmosphere, their energy cannons charging for what should have been a one-sided slaughter. But as they broke through the cloud layer, the pilots found themselves facing something no Valerian military manual had prepared them for. 43 dragons rose to meet them in perfect battle formation. These weren't the broken, defeated creatures the Empire remembered. These were apex predators working together for the first time in generations, and they were furious about decades of abuse and humiliation. Zephyr led the charge, his golden scales blazing like a miniature sun as he dove toward the lead attack ship. His claws, now fully coordinated thanks to Tyrone's healing work, sliced through alien armor like it was made of paper. Behind him, Ember breathed fire hot enough to melt titanium while Frost created ice shields that deflected energy beams back at their sources. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Valerian attack ships, designed to intimidate ground-based civilizations, found themselves completely outmatched by opponents who could fly circles around them in 3 dimensions. Dragon after dragon demonstrated abilities the Empire thought they'd successfully suppressed through years of torture and experimentation. But the real shock came when the dragons began using tactics that no alien had ever seen before. They worked in coordinated groups, covering each other's attacks and creating complex formations that maximized their natural advantages. At the center of it all, Tyrone's voice crackled over radio frequencies as he directed the battle from his position on Zephyr's back. "Storm, break left and hit their flank," he called out, somehow keeping track of dozens of moving pieces in a 3-dimensional chess game played at supersonic speeds. "Ember, their shields are down now." The human had become more than just Zephyr's healer. He was their strategist, their coordinator, their link between individual dragons and collective action. His understanding of both dragon capabilities and alien weaknesses turned the star dragons from magnificent but chaotic fighters into an unstoppable force. Emperor Vortak watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were falling like leaves in autumn, their crews abandoning vessels that had become death traps. The impossible was happening before his eyes. His mighty empire was being defeated by creatures he'd considered worthless property. When Zephyr finally landed on the flagship's bridge, carrying Tyrone on his back, the Emperor's rage had turned to something much more dangerous: fear. This human had done more than heal one dragon. He'd awakened an entire species and given them hope for the first time in centuries. "Your empire ends today," Tyrone said quietly, sliding down from Zephyr's neck to stand before the massive alien ruler. "But it doesn't have to end in destruction. Surrender now, free the remaining dragons, and maybe we can find a better way forward." The galaxy would never be the same. A species that had been written off as broken had risen again, led by a human who saw potential where others saw only problems.